Welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking about importer and exporter today. For those of you who are not familiar with the boot camps, and the boot camp is just a very specific training on a specific feature, or in this case, a specific product like importer, exporter. We pick out one topic and just kind of dive into it. Now, importer and exporter, there's a lot to go over, a lot of fringe cases that we could talk about. That's not what this session's about. This boot camp is going to be about the most common scenarios. Importer and exporter, these two products go hand in hand. If you'd imagine, importer is built for bringing data and documents into the system, whereas exporter is built for taking data and documents out of the system. Okay, so you use them quite a bit in unison. The biggest thing about them is they even look the same when you install them. So I do want to talk about the installation procedure. I get questions all the time about where do I find the installers? Okay, of course, you can go to the admin portal. If you have a login for there, they're always there along with the other installers for the server and AD sync and all that. But the easiest place to get them is to go to any of our doc management sites, your demo sites, your customer sites, any of them. Go to the admin system, and there is a software panel in here that has downloadable software, and importer and exporter are right there. You can download them from here and then walk through the installer. And the installations for these are just simple. There's really nothing to do. There's no options. You just say yes, 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 and it goes. You can also download the help files and the add-ins help file. There's a whole bunch of add-ins you can include. And we're going to talk about one specifically today that's kind of almost a requirement for exporter in a lot of cases. But other than that, we're not going to delve into them, but you can read through them if you want to go through the add-ins helps. And speaking of help, on our doc management site, there is a resources tab where you can go to the online documentation and you'll see doc management server, the install, importer service, exporter service. You can get to all the help files here as well. So once you've got it installed, you'll notice that there is no start menu option. If you go to your start menu and you look for an importer or an exporter icon, there won't be one there. Importer and exporter is not just a standard application. It's actually a shell extension. So it's folder centric. So you would go to a folder. Let's take this one, for instance. I have a series of folders I'm going to walk you through here. If I had documents, say, in this folder that I wanted to grab, I could go up and right click on the folder. Now in Windows 11, I have to go to show more options, but on Windows 10 and earlier, you don't. You'll have doc management import and export as two options. If I want to configure that folder to bring in PDFs or CSVs or whatever, I would go there and I would click configure. Okay, and there's your importer configuration. Once you save that configuration, it becomes a file inside that folder. So let me just go ahead and start one up. Just throw something in here so I can save it. There we go. Now, if I go into this basics folder, it created this config.dmicfg. Now, DMICFG stands for Doc Management Importer Config. And when exporter saves its file, it's very similar, except it's DMECFG, E for exporter, I for importer. Once I'm done configuring this file, I can move it to other folders if I wanted to. So let's say that I wanted to take this file, I wanted to configure an import for a customer, get it running on my machine. I can take this config file and copy it to their machine and they can run it, providing they have importer installed, of course. So they're very portable. And the add-ins add a little extra layer to that, which we'll talk about in the next session. If you do have any add-ins, there'll be another folder called add-ins. You'll have to copy that as well. But you can just take those and copy them somewhere else, and they should run just as well as they do here. I can delete it, and it's done. So let me go back in there. Import, configure. Now let's talk about our options. Oh, one other thing about the installation. I should say this. Once it's installed, it does not auto-update to the next version. There's two ways to update it. Well, three ways, really. You could go download the next version if you want to from the admin site or from the admin portal, or you can double-click this version label down here, and it'll go check to see if there's a newer version out there. If there is, it'll ask you if you want to install it. You just hit yes, and it'll walk you through the installation, and it's done. Pretty simple. The other place you can go is to the Help tab up here, and say check for new version does the same thing. Okay, so let's talk about this interface. An exporter is very similar. I'll show you that here in a minute. So what you do is you tell it what server you're going to import into. In this case, I'm going to use the beta site for our testing. And notice I have to put in the full URL. I can't just put in beta. I have to put in the HTTPS:// just like a browser. Okay. And then put in a user that you're going to use for authenticating to the system. One thing I'll note here is I personally prefer to set up custom users for each importer or exporter. Importers, I might use the same importer for all my imports. Exporters, which we'll talk about a little later, a lot of times there's a reason to have a separate export user for every process. So like exporter invoices, exporter HR, and I'll walk you through why, but it has to do with workflow assignments. So a lot of times you'll want separate users. I would definitely, at a minimum, set up an importer user and an exporter user and use them. For logging and seeing who changed what, it's invaluable to make sure it was not an end user that did it, but the importer that uploaded something. So it's nice to have that logged. And if you have a different user, it makes it easier to diagnose issues later. So once you have the username and password in there, definitely hit test to make sure it works. Great, we're authenticated. First thing now you'll probably notice underneath is import type is an option. And this is why I usually tell people don't change anything in our config unless you absolutely have to, because most things are already set to the best defaults. Normal is when you import data and documents from, basically it's all document centric, but you're importing things from this folder up to the server. And when it's done importing, you can tell it to delete the files when it's done importing them or not. For testing, I usually turn off the delete flag so that I can rerun my imports 2 or 3 times until I get everything just right, and then turn the delete on. So now it'll start cleaning up after itself. If you forget to turn that on and you go to production with it, you're probably going to upload the same files over and over and over again and going to have a lot of duplicate data on your servers. So be careful with that. Sync. This one's an interesting one. It was put in a long time ago to be able to synchronize data between a folder and our server. And it's not meant for long-term keeping folders in sync. It's more for transitioning customers from using a folder-based system and moving them to the web. So you can actually, as new documents are dropped into their folder structure, we can bring it into Doc Management, and using their folder structure as indexing, we can index documents so they're searchable based on the folder structure that they had in their Windows folders. Okay. This, like I said, this is not really a long-term solution. It's more of a short-term to get people out of the Windows folders and into our system. If you can just do a batch import and get them in day one, great, you're done. A lot of times it takes time to migrate people over. That's where this comes in handy. Now, this document pointers down here is grayed out because I'm connected to a cloud site. If you have a premise site, you don't have to import all the documents in. You can just import pointers to wherever the documents are on the local structure. And as long as the web server that they're running locally has access to it, you don't even have to move the documents in the system. That's a little more advanced. If you get to the point where you think you need it, contact us, okay? But typically, just leave it normal, and then the delete flag is really up to you whether you're testing or not. OCR options, once again, don't change it 99.9% of the time. Normally, the server will dictate whether or not it's going to OCR. You don't have to worry about it here. There are times, however, when you want the local system to override the server settings. That's where this comes into play. I normally don't recommend setting this for anything except for that scenario when you want to override the norm. Okay? So usually let the server decide. If you want to tell the server, no matter what you're configured to do, I want you to OCR them, that's how you'd set it. Or the reverse, no matter what your settings are, don't OCR these. Once again, you don't normally need to mess with any of this stuff. Other options, however, the routing flag is one you do have to change quite a bit, depending on your scenario. If you're importing lookup data, you're probably not going to route it. If you're importing invoices, you probably are going to route them so they can be processed. That one you might have to turn on. The rest of these, I mean, only route on new records. Typically, if you're doing a match and merge, you don't want to route the record that you merged into. But if it's a new record, you may have to route it for something. That's where that comes into play. If you want to turn on routing with match and merge, you know, once again, if you feel like you need it, talk to us. Let's walk through it or test it, play with it a little bit, get familiar with it. I wouldn't recommend computing your document size and page count right away because it'll really slow down your imports. And then this option is kind of nice. And if you've ever done this where you say, watch my screen when I hit save. Notice saving config to server. It went pretty quick there. If you leave that turned on, it'll actually save a copy of the configuration that you just saved up to the server. So if your local machine crashes, you can go back and get a copy of it. So that's a nice feature. And I usually tell people to leave that on. Once again, if you're just testing like I am, I'm probably just going to turn it off because it's kind of annoying to wait that extra couple seconds for it to save. I'm going to run through a couple of these other screens. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them, but I'm going to walk through what they are. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use actual examples to show you how to configure these tabs as needed. Okay, file types. What kind of files are you going to try to import? If I know I'm going to do a CSV, I probably would set it to star.csv. Just in case somebody drops in a PDF accidentally in that folder, you probably don't want to import it. So a lot of times I'll specify exactly what I'm looking for. But there are cases where it could be a Word doc, a PDF, an Excel spreadsheet, when you kind of need the star.star. Or you could specifically put in star.pdf for one of them, docx for another one, or whatever. DocS. So you could do it that way as well. Now, one thing I will say, if you're importing CSVs, you'll notice there's a section up here. If file type is star.csv, then you have options. It's kind of tempting to turn on this, oh, import CSV, that's what I want to do. No, read the whole thing. Import CSV as a document and do not process the file line by line as CSV. Basically telling it to import the CSV as a document, not as rows of data. So once again, like I said at the beginning, don't turn on switch any options unless you know you need it for some reason, because the default is usually right. And they're usually commas separated. Sometimes you'll get a tab separated or even a pipe separated, something like that. That's where these come into play, but typically it's comma. Now, if it's not CSV, maybe let's say you have text files coming in. Somebody's dropping in TXT files, but they're actually CSV data inside of it. They just named it .text. That's where you can turn on this feature. If it's not star.csv, act like it is and process it line by line. And maybe it's a pipe delimited version. You can kind of combine those options. The other one that's fairly important is this one down here, import each document into its own record. And I'll talk about this a little bit later when we don't walk through the CSV stuff. But basically, Importer has its own way of matching like data into a single record. And if you're importing documents with no index data whatsoever, they all look like they belong together. So it'll take these 5 PDFs and throw them into one record and route them, which may not be what you want. In that case, you would turn on this flag to import each document separately in its own record rather than putting them into one. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the CSV import part. Indexing, we'll get into that a little later as well. Folders, if you have subfolders, which we do inside of here, Importer is built to go into every subfolder and look for documents and data or whatever you've configured for it. Okay, so if you have a main folder with a config is, it'll start there, look for anything to do. If it doesn't find anything, it'll go to every subfolder and look for things to do. And inside there, it'll look for more subfolders. So it's a recursive process by default. If you know that you don't want to process one of these folders, just uncheck it. And Importer will skip it. The other thing Importer does, as far as skipping folders goes, if you have a folder named with an underscore at the beginning of it, then it'll skip it as well. So for instance, watch. Let's see, I'll just put a folder in here. Test, underscore test. Now, if I go to my configure my importer, go to the folders, it doesn't even show up in the list. So underscore folders are by default ignored. And there's really no way to override that. So what we use that for is the logs folder is going to be underscore logs. So it doesn't get imported. You don't want the logs to be imported. Also, if we do backups, our standard naming convention is underscore backup or backups, plural. Either one works fine. Anything with an underscore you can use for your own uses. Copies of data, if you want to save copies of old imports, things like that, make sure you put them into an underscore folder, and then you don't have to worry about tagging them in the import config. Scripts. You can run scripts before and after the importer does its job. You can do batch files, executables, PowerShell files, whatever you want to run. Depending on which script is run, the command line is sent to it with the folder that is processing. So for this one, this folder name would be sent in as the command line to the script. After a folder is processed, the same one. Before a file is processed, the file name that's being imported is sent to it. Likewise, after the file's done, the file name is sent to the shell afterwards. Add-ins, once again, more advanced. I won't get into it today, but you can extend what you can do with Importer and Exporter by using our built-in add-ins, renaming files, merging documents, things like that. Scheduling, once again, I probably won't get into it too much. Just turn on scheduling, tell it how often to run, every 10 minutes or 120 minutes in this case. Save and close, and that'll create a schedule for it. Notes, this is just for you to use to put notes in for whatever you want to talk about for this config. And then help tells you a little bit about your local configuration. You can request help if you want to. This is a nice button. This will actually send your config and your add-in configs to our support line so that we can help you review the problem, see what's up. So if you need help, that's a good way. Most of the time, you will call in for help or you'll email for help. We'll say, send us the configs. You can just go hit this button. It'll send it to us. Let's talk about some scenarios. All right. So the most common scenario is importing data, just CSV data for lookup tables, etc. So what we're going to do is let me make sure I'm cleaned up here. Yep, nothing there. So I'm going to walk through importing a CSV of employee files, employee data. Okay, let's take a look at the data we're importing. Very simple. Name, DOB, position. Now, if I go to my record type for employees, so if I go to employees and look at the actual field names, not the field header. Remember, that header can be a different name. This could be spelled out date of birth. What I really care about is these over here. These names, you want to match them up to your CSV names as closely as possible. So we got name equals name, DOB, and position. So those three are named correctly. So I don't have to do anything different. I can just import it as is. And we'll talk about that here in a sec. No, don't save. Okay. So let's look at our config. Walking through, we got our login already set, just a normal import. I've turned off deleting and I turned off routing, which is defaulted off. So it should just be a normal import, nothing crazy. I set it to look at CSV files, only import CSV. And now on the indexing tab, this is where you set the data that's going to be imported. For a CSV import, the CSV is processed line by line. So let me load that back up here. Side by side here. Okay. So when I want to bring in this CSV, what's going to happen is it's going to go to line 1, which is actually line 2, because line 1 will be the header. Line 2 will be processed as a record. It's going to be pulled in as a record to doc management. The field names that we're going to be using are the header names. So we're going to have a field named name with the value of Carrie Wood. Let's go ahead and expand that so we can see. Then we're going to have a field named DOB with this value and position of CEO. The thing we're missing here is we're not telling it what record type to go into. So what I can do over here in my import values is I can manually add a field named record type with the value employees, which will take it to the right record type. What happens is these values here are added to the values for each line to make one complete record. So if I wanted to add other things, like uploaded by as Brad, things like that, I can do that. And all of these values will be added to the row when it comes up. I don't think I've filled out anything else. This is just a very simple import. But I want to demonstrate how you use the import values along with the CSV header values. Close this so we don't have an access error. And then go back out, make sure we're still empty. All right, so I'm going to do is I'm going to save and run now. I did turn off the delete. Yes, okay. So come up on the other screen. Here you go. That was pretty fast. So there's the 5 records that were in that CSV. I look at them and look at the raw data. A source importer is always put in. We put that in so you know the source of the record. Okay, and that can be very handy in workflow in other cases. CSV line is another field that we put in automatically that gives you the entire line that came out of the actual CSV. Another thing used for troubleshooting. These are just things we've learned over the years. The rest of the fields are what you put in there. These DOB name and position came from the CSV itself, and record type came from the config. As you'll remember, we did that config. So just to demonstrate, CSV plus the configs. I do get a lot of people who will put in something like this, name equals name, and I'll talk about the variables in a second. What they're thinking is, I need to put all of the CSV data in here so that it gets put into the system, but that's actually wrong. What's going to happen, notice it's getting a little bit of an error flag there. What's going to happen is it's going to duplicate the data. You're going to have date of birth in there twice, DOB in twice, name in there twice. Because it adds this to whatever already coming in the CSV. Now, what happens if, let me go back here, clean out, delete those. What if, just open a notepad so it doesn't make a mess. Instead of being name and DOB, it is date of, let's just say birth. Maybe it's DO birth. So the actual column name is not the same as our record type is defined as. That's where you can actually use, on the indexing tab, I can say, send up date of birth, but use the value from DO birth. So this will take the DO birth value from that second column and put it into a field named DOB. And that quick, goes fast. There we go. Last search. DOB's there now, but watch what happens in here. There's our DO birth that came from the CSV. We added a DOB and told it to use the value that was in the DO birth column. So you'll notice what happens is you're not just renaming, you're actually adding a new field with a new name, but you're using the value of another one. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you have to do a lot of renaming, there could be a lot of extra data here, which you don't want to put too much extra data in there. A little bit's okay. There are ways to avoid that. You can exclude fields like DO birth can actually be excluded from the upload if you put it into the exclude fields, but we can still use that value to fill in the DOB file, DOB value. So that's where that comes in handy. And let me walk through a couple other things here before we move on. The other thing that happens a little bit, I'll just use Notepad again, is that sometimes you don't have a header with your data. If that's the case, you can actually build your own headers over here by putting them in order, one per line. That would do the same thing. And what we do is we automatically add the header to the file as we're processing as if it was already there. And then everything else really is configured the same all the way through. Okay, so now we have some data up there to play with. Nice. Next scenario is a CSV that actually has documents attached to it. And by attached to it, let's just open it up here. A pointer, there's a column. This happens quite often where you would have a document column. The name of this column is not important. What Importer does is it goes through every cell, every column of every line and sees that if there's a file in that folder that has the same name as the value in the CSV. If it does, it brings it up as a document. So it'll take these 3 columns and make the record out of that, and they'll put this document in when it's done. So you don't have to do, once again, we've really tried to build Importer and Exporter to be kind of built for the norm. Okay, and that's normally what people want to do. They just want to have these values here and then put the document with it. And technically, you wouldn't even have to have a column name. I like to put them in there just so I know what's there, but it doesn't really matter. The other thing you can do is if you had 2 of them, you could just put in another column and put the name of the other file there. So now these 2 files will become in as documents, providing they both exist on disk. Now, if this Connie Douglas PDF didn't exist over here, right there, it would put in a field named document and put that value into it. So if you do an import for documents and all of a sudden you notice you don't have any documents, but there's data, raw data in your record that says document equals something.pdf, then you know what happened is that document wasn't there. And that can be for various reasons. It could be put in the wrong place. A lot of times what I see is the CSV is built first, and importer grabs it and starts importing it before the documents have been dropped in the same folder. So there's a timing issue sometimes. Watch out for that. We won't go into that today, but there's various reasons. But just know if there's a document there, it'll bring it in. So let's go ahead and run this. Import. There we go. Notice it says saving record and uploading document. There's several things in these logs you can look at. And I'll bring up the log file up here in a little bit too and show you. All this data on the screen is logged to the text files, log files in this folder here by date, so you can see. Okay, so now let's go back and do our search. And now we have 5 more records, same data. We didn't do a match and merge, so it added new data. We'll go to the match and merge section in a bit. But if we go into these new records, you'll see documents in there with them. There's our Kerry Wood. No category, no subcategory, and the name of the document is the same name as the PDF without the .pdf on the end. So that's your default. If I wanted to, actually, let's just look at this. There are some keywords you can use like doc category. If I use doc category and I put a value in there, maybe it's invoice or something like that, that will be the category of any document that gets uploaded from this line. Same thing with doc subcategory and doc name. So if I wanted to override the name and not just be whatever .pdf, I could put whatever I wanted to here. And that would be the document name that shows up here. So you can control these, and these are documented in the importer and help file. But you can also do them here. The CSV, the nice thing about the CSV is you have your own options. You could do doc category here, right, and not have to worry about changing your CSV. Just add it to your config. Now you lose a little bit of flexibility where you can't change the name line by line, but if it's the same name, your category, whatever you want to use, just do it in the config, and it's a lot easier than messing with your CSV. Now this, we're talking match and merge. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of all these records. Actually, I'll just get rid of the top 5. Those are the last ones we just added. So let me get rid of those. Go back to the originals. Now, at this point, if we look at the CSV, we have name, address, city, and state. So we have the name, which matches, and then we have some new fields. So this would be a good case for match and merge. Now, typically, you would use an identifier like an employee ID or an invoice number or something like that. But in this case, I'm just using name. Now, the configuration of this is very much the same as your normal import. Indexing, you still have to put in your record type because whatever, that wasn't in the CSV. The other fields will come from the CSV. Let me open that back up. So we're going to match on name. Here we go. Our match and merge is really pretty straightforward. All you have to do is tell us what fields you want to use for matching. That's it. You notice, though, we were going to match on name to update it, but you notice the record type field is in here too. If you forget to put record type in there, it could find any record in the system with the same name. Could be on an invoice, could be on an HR document, could be on an employee file. You never know. So make sure you put the record type in there, because envision what's happening behind the scenes is really, it's taking the value of the record type field, which is going to be employees, and the value of the name, which will be, Kerry Wood. And it's taking those two values and doing a search of the system. Find where record type is employees and name is Kerry Wood. If it finds one, it'll say, got one, we'll just put this data into that record. And documents too, if you have them. If it doesn't find one, it will add one for you. It'll add a record. So that's a great way to just maintain data lists. If you're adding or changing data, it'll automatically maintain them. Now, if you don't want it to add a new record when it doesn't find, tell it to skip processing record if no match found. Okay, that's for if, okay, all I want to do is update existing ones. I don't want to make new ones. And there are cases for that. Same thing with the reverse. If there is a match, don't do anything. I don't need to even look at it. I just know the record's there. That's all I care about. If I don't find one, then it will add a new one for you. Once again, there are cases for both scenarios. Simple thing is just put in the record type and then whatever the unique value is, or a combination of those. Like with invoices, it might be vendor ID and invoice number, because two vendors could have the same invoice number potentially. So you might have to tell it both. So now it'll do a search for all three. There we go. So it's going to look for that record type employees where the name is whatever's in the file. So let's go ahead and close the file. We'll run it. And we're getting city, state, zip information in, or address, city, state information. So while it's running, I'm going to stop this for a second. So you can kind of look through the logs. Okay, data values to import. It sets record type equals employees, and then it's looking for, it finds Darren Adams. It does a search, finds a match for record ID. There's all the data it's going to upload into it. Now it's uploading the data with those 5 items. So you just kind of walk through, you can see what's going on. So if I do my search now, the same records are going to be there, but now they have more information because we did a match and merge. Let's talk about a little bit of variable. So it's the same kind of thing. We're going to import this. Let me look and see what's in here. Name, date of birth, position, same information. But in the config, oh, it's already open. On the indexing, we're adding our own values. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. Just like the server has variables, so do importer and exporter. The variable names are going to be a little different. Some of them are the same, date, time, those are going to be the same as the server. But you can have other ones that are more specific to what importer does or what exporter does. So for instance, if I look at this little question mark over here, let's say I didn't remember what the name of that variable was, I could put my cursor here, hit the question mark, and look and see what's available. Okay, there's date and time. I just double click that and it'll put it in there for me. But if you'll notice other ones, when you click on them, it gives you a little help down below. Folder will be the folder name that's being imported right now. Folder name pound, which would be 012. A little more advanced topic, but we can basically index based on the parent folders. So for instance, if I am, let me go out here. If I'm in folder 1, well, let's say the config starts here in the main folder, and then I find a document in folder B, for instance. Folder B will be the folder name. Okay, folder, or I could do folder name 0, right? Basics, this one would be the next one up from there. So that'd be the parent. So that would be folder name 1, folder name 2, folder name 3, and so on and so forth. So if you have a structure of folders that you're dropping documents in, you can use every individual folder name for a field value or for some kind of tracking value. That's where the folder name number comes into. So for this case, I would say, let's say if I want to grab the parent's parent or my parent folder, there you go, folder name 1. So folder name 0 is the file that the actual document is found in. Folder name 1 is the parent above it, and so on. So there's a lot of variables in here. We won't get every one of them. Plus, there's more. These are the most common ones. These are the ones we use more often, but there are more. If you look at the help files, you'll see a whole variables section that talks about the variables available too. And you can use those for names and for values. So I could actually use something here like this. This would put a file with the file name only, which is, and the CSV, by the way, the file name variables are the CSV, not the documents. So keep that in mind. Anyway, so I could actually name the field if I wanted to. Typically, you wouldn't do that, but you might use it for doc category. Equals folder, something like that. The last thing I want to do is talk about document-only routing, because as of now, we've only talked about CSV. Let's do one more scenario. So you have folder names, you have more environmental data, but you don't have a CSV that gives you a lot of information, which a lot of times when you're scanning from a photocopy or something, that's really all you get. What we can do is we can use some of these values to configure as well. So everything's pretty much the same. The difference would be instead of a CSV, I might tell it to look for PDFs only, depending on the source. And on the indexing side, you really have to specify as much data as you want or as you can. So record type, same thing, AP invoices, I got to specify a record type. I always tag some of this stuff with the upload file name, the upload date, just so I have some tracking information, just so I wouldn't know which file it was that created this record. The other thing, as if you remember, we talked about, if this information, let's say I didn't have this in here, or this, and all I did was put in AP invoices. When it imports the first document, it creates a new record, uploads a document into it. The only value in that record is the record type, because that's all I've configured. There's AP invoices. So when it gets to the second document, it's going to grab all the indexing it knows about it, which is all it really knows at this point is there's a document with a single value, record type equals AP invoices. It compares it to the previous file that was uploaded and says, hey, that's the same record information, so I'm going to put it in the same record. So that might not be a problem with invoices. It'll probably auto split anyway, but why make it work extra? So what you can do in the file types is this button down here, import each document to its own record, regardless of index matches. If you're doing separate PDF imports for separate invoices, definitely use this. It will speed up processing. Otherwise, we're combining it on the front end and then breaking it apart again on the back end, which is needless. So I'll just go ahead and leave that off there. There's no matching to do. There's nothing extra here because there's really no other information. I could try to put in like doc category is invoice. That might not be a bad one. Okay. And there may be some tracking information, like I said, new equals yes, whatever you want to put in, doesn't matter. So now what will happen is, like I said, instead of going line by line in the CSV, it's going to go document by document in the folder, of course, excluding the underscores, and it does not import its own config file, so you don't have to worry about that. It's going to find those two PDFs and it's going to upload them. So let me go back and check on AP invoices. Okay, nothing there. We'll run it. And there it is, running on the back end. There we go. Uploading. Oh, and the one thing I forgot to point out in the config while it's doing that is I did turn on routing. So it route them down the process. So think about uploading an invoice through the browser with routing turned on. It'll send it through the invoicing, the machine learning, all that. Now we have, they're both already in OCR processing page 1. That one's being split, updating documents. So you can, it's set to automatically and show the progress there. That one's done. And that one's done. So it did the whole thing. Now we've got a couple invoices already indexed. And all we did was throw in those two PDFs with really no indexing information other than record type and routing. All right, we definitely have taken up enough time on importer. I have to have a few more minutes for exporter, so let's bounce onto that right away. So if you right click on your folder and go to export, Doc Management Export, you can configure or run. If you configure, it looks a lot alike, right? So they're really built the same way, same kind of thing. You tell it what site you're gonna export from, test it. Now this is where things get a little different. Exporter is built really to work with workflow first. Okay, it's workflow centric by default. You can see the default config tells it to look for work items. This is where I told you to probably set up separate users for your exports, because what happens is with the workflow flag turned on, exporter is going to look for any record that's routed to it, and it's going to export it. It doesn't care what record type it's in. It doesn't really know anything about it. It just says, I found a record. I'm pulling it down with all the documents and everything. Well, in this case, I haven't told it yet. So I'm going to tell it documents and record data. And I can do line items here. Okay. So it's very workflow centric, which makes it great for that final step of the workflow where you need to export the data to some internal system or send it somewhere. Exporter can bring it down so you can do something with it. There are ways to make it find records specifically and not use workflow, and we're going to talk about it here shortly, but it's built for work items. So either way, even if you do record searches, I still would rather see people use a special user, exporter or something like that for it. The filter tab, you can filter specific ones, maybe only where ready equals yes. But in my mind, if I had it routed to me, I think it's already ready. So you rarely need to use these filters. Typically, I tell people don't even bother with this, because if you do a record search with an add-in, which I'll show later, you can already tell it which ones to grab. And in workflow, you're already telling things to stop at a workflow step based on a flag anyway. So this is rarely used. Now, the advanced tab, this one has a lot of capability. It's a way more than this meeting is called for. But basically, just skip over that for now. In the next session, I'll definitely be talking about. Now, renaming is something that's very useful. And you'll see here in a minute, the data and the documents that come out of the basic exporter are really generic. You have a records CSV. You have a documents.csv, and then you have all the documents named with document ID .pdf or whatever. All right, and that's what you get. You can do some renaming. Instead of using record.csv, you could call it invoice.csv or something like that. Same thing with a line item file. It comes out into its own CSV file, so everything's delineated easier. It's line items.csv, but you could change it here if you wanted to. Under the document one, you could change the documents CSV to something else. And then the documents themselves. Instead of being 1234.pdf, you could do things like, okay, let's name it with doc category, and then maybe a hyphen, and then let's do the invoice number. Then we could do dot, and then whatever the extension is, just in case we sometimes have other things other than PDF. Now, if I know they're PDFs, I could just type in, dot PDF. That'd be fine too. But extension's kind of nice. So you can use variables here for your naming as well. Scripts, just like importer, exporter has its own events that can fire scripts. These are kind of the precursor to add-ins. And we'll talk about the record search add-in shortly. But either one of these kind of to customize the experience. Scheduling, once again, you can have it look every 10 minutes, 5 minutes, every hour, whatever, to find new documents to export. And if you're using the workflow-based export, which is the default, when it's done exporting, it will automatically complete that workflow item for you. So it's built to not only pull from the workflow, but actually complete the workflow so it can move on. Also, if it has an error or an exception, maybe it couldn't write the file out to disk is full, something like that, it will actually reject that workflow item so you can be alerted with some kind of rejection step. I forgot to mention that earlier. And then the notes and help are just like importer. You can put your own notes here. You can look at the information on the machine or send in the configs. So let's actually look at, okay, we got a couple invoices there. So here's some exports I have built already. Let's look at this one. Notice I used exporter as a separate user there. I'm going to process the work items that are there. I'm going to export the record data and the line items only, not the documents, because I just want the data. And I'm not really doing anything else different here. It's just real basic. Username, what I want to export. That's it. That should be enough. And if I notice over here and I look at the reports, the work items are assigned to that exporter user. Now, if we run, let me go back to the folder here. Okay, it's save and run now. I want you to see what happens by default. So it's running behind the scenes. And as I said, this is very generic, nothing configured other than the defaults. You get two folders, 25182 and 25183. If I look at the information from the records, there's my 25183, 25182. So it uses the ID of the record to create a folder for that record. Then it exports the data into record.csv, which is going to be your regular header data. Okay. And a pointer to the line item CSV, which holds the line item data. Which probably isn't super useful to a lot of systems out there, but we had to add some basic, really easy to understand format to pipe it out to so people could deal with it. You could actually take it from here and write your own scripting, whatever you want to massage your data out to some other system if you'd like. If you combine the renaming and things like that, you can get it closer to what you need before it comes out. There are also some add-ins, and I don't know if I have any. Yeah, I don't have any here. There's also some add-ins you can use that I'll talk about. We'll talk about it now. Okay, so for instance, we're going to talk about the record search later, but you can actually say merge exported records, which would take all of those folders it's creating and make one folder. So it puts them all in one folder, and then the records CSV will have multiple entries, the line items have multiples, everything's in one folder instead of multiple folders. Also, there's an add-in that puts the document data into the record CSV. So you can have one CSV with all the header data and a document list in it, instead of having to have two files, one for the records, one for the documents. So there are some built-in add-ins here that allow you to kind of merge things together. But like I said, by default, when you run it, you're going to get one folder per record, and everything goes in there. This configuration is to pull the documents. Okay? Because there are cases when I don't care about anything but the documents, and there's other cases where all I care about is the data. And then, of course, you can have them all together into one export if you want to put them all there. Now those items are still sitting in workflow, and I don't think I have any renaming. Nope, no renaming. So let's just run it again. Found those two items again, export processing. There's my 25183 again. And then second, I'll get the 25182. There you go. So if I look, basically the same, except instead of the record CSVs, it's the document CSVs, and your document is named with the document's ID. And of course, the file here points to it. So you get the record ID, the category, subcategory, the name, and the file. We also have add-ins that will delete or that will move PDFs after they've been exported, so you can put them into a single folder and then delete the folders they came from. There's all sorts of stuff we can do. I'm just demonstrating once again the basics here. Okay, now let's talk about non-workflow based. In this case, I still want to export the data and the documents, but I'm not doing workflow. What I've done is I've added the record search add-in in here. Now, if I hit load, that's the second one down here. You can just double click or hit the install button, it'll add it. So let me go ahead and remove it, and I'll put it back in just so you can see it. Okay, so I took it out. I'm going to put it back in, record search. When I come back in, I've got that add-in. I can double click it or hit the configure button, and then this is how I can configure the add-in. Now, each add-in is different because they have different purposes. So there is no one standard config screen. But in this case, record type equals, let's see, AP-invoices, I believe. This will find all of the invoice records. I could also put, ready equals yes, or whatever other filters I need. But in this case, I want to take all the invoices. Okay. I could also update another flag, maybe exported equals yes, and I could also search for exported equals empty, if I could spell it. There we go. So look for all the ones where exported is not set, and then when I'm done exporting them, set it to yes, so that you can export it once and not have to do it again. Kind of like workflow, but without having workflows, but I'm going to get rid of those. Okay, so now if I look at that, it's just going to look for record type as AP invoices. Nothing else is different. Everything else is the same as what we had before. It's just not using workflow. Now, if I run that, it'll be a little faster because it's not having to process workflow. But other than that, you should get about the same results. There we go. This time I selected all of them, so you can see a complete export of all the data, record, line item, documents, and then every document inside there. If I had to use the add-ins to combine them, I could have put them all into one folder and had, maybe just 2 CSVs or something like that. Let's look at some of the renaming options. So in this case, I'm going to do the record search again, so I don't need workflow, and I'm just going to export documents. But in this case, I want to rename those documents on the way out. Remember we talked about using those variables. This is where I'm using an invoice number dash vendor ID dash amount dot extension. If I run it, go into one of those. So there's your PDF. Now, what's great about this is other systems can also parse file names. And I didn't show you that with Importer, but we can do it as well, of course. You can parse out a file name, split it, break it up, use index values. If you have other systems you're sending it to that can do the same thing, you could use this method to output these documents so they can be imported to something else with all the indexes you require. Now, this I want to demonstrate. This one is another add-in in here. A couple of them, actually. Let's take a look. Same kind of thing, just exporting documents. I'm not even sure if I did any renaming on this one. Nope, didn't. But on the add-ins, I have a record search and a document mover. The record search is still the same. The document mover, though, is very commonly used. So I wanted to throw this in at least in one demonstration. So you can actually, after the export's done, you can move things around. Okay, so I got all the documents and I'm stuck with that darn CSV, right? So I'm going to do is say, grab all the PDF files and move them to the exported folder, which will be created in here. Period means current folder name, which is going to be here, / exported. It'll make it for you. Okay. Leave the destination file name alone, so it just takes the file name that came in. And then when I'm done moving everything I want out of that folder, just delete the folder that came in. So it does the same thing as the other exports, but this time it kind of moves things and cleans things up a little bit. So if we watch this, I'll refresh a little bit here so you can see now. If you noticed if the 25183 came in and then deleted so fast, It's moving the PDFs into this folder and then deleting everything else that was left over in the other folder. So had I done the renaming here, I would have most of my index values and my documents with it, and I wouldn't have all the extra junk around it. So you can have a cleaner export. These are the basic scenarios. And then one more thing, I want to show you a couple of these things, the log files that are generated. Oh, another screen, of course. Everything you saw flashing across that black screen shows up in the log file. So don't worry that you couldn't see it. You can always go look at it here. Even the add-ins that are called and the folders that are used, that kind of thing. If there's an error, you will have a file, I think it's called Errors.log. If an error occurs, it'll log the error in the regular log file, but it'll also create a new file called Errors.log. And what you can do is you can monitor for that file having some other process, because there's a lot of tools out there that can monitor for the existence of files, things of that nature. If you can add this to your error monitoring system, then you'll be alerted to errors right away, rather than waiting to see something broke. The other thing I want to show is the add-in structure. So we added in, and this one I didn't even end up using, I don't think. Nope, so I'll get rid of that. When you add an add-in through the interface, it's just creating folders where it puts the add-in DLL and the config file for it. Same thing with the record search. If I was to actually open this up, well, let me open it here and show you. I think, there we go. It's just an XML file with settings. There's my search values, record type equals AP invoices. The reason I'm telling you that is if you ever wanted to copy this to config to somewhere else, all you really need is the add-ins folder and the config file. I take this, copy it, move it to another folder, somewhere else, whatever, as long as importer, actually in this case, exporter is there, and now I can run it here with the add-ins and everything included.